if you have certain things happening to you when you're younger, it is likely to affect your attitudes, not just then, but in the near and in the far term. A lot of people have very similar attitudes to life.
Which trends do you predict will define business in decades to come?
I think when we're looking at the future, when we're looking at what the trends are going to be, we're looking at a lot of sort of the broader trends coming out. And I think really a lot of the trends are going to fall broadly into two categories. Categories around size and categories around technology. And I think on the one hand, in terms of size, we're going to see the bigger companies, the really, the big end of companies. It's going to be about scale. It's going to be about cheapness and convenience. And those big companies are going to thrive because they can drive price and they can drive convenience. So on that side of things, very big scale will be fine. On the opposite end, it's going to be about small, local, artisanal, human to human, trust, all those kinds of things. I think the middle is going to fall away. I think companies that are in the middle, that don't have either the scale to be able to offer cheap and convenient, or that human touch, are going to be in trouble. And I think a similar thing might be happening with technology. I think we're going to see some very high-tech companies, companies that thrive around technology. Some of the new technology coming through, whether that's around AI or augmented reality, around 5 and 6G, combining all of those around with big data and kind of create augmented commerce, which is the next step on from e-commerce. Loads of fascinating things happening around that. So I think the companies that really take hold and grasp the nettle of new technology will actually really thrive. There'll be some amazing things that new technology can do. So on that hand, very high tech, or companies that understand the very latest technology will be able to do that. I think, on the other hand, companies that don't necessarily worry about the technology necessarily, but the companies that emphasize humanness and service. So either on one hand, you're creating convenience or ease via technology. On the other hand, you're giving people something that's very human, that's very service-led. So those, I think, again, will be the two extremes. And anybody who kind of falls a little bit in the middle, who doesn't quite give enough service, but also, puts a toe in the water of technology, but doesn't really quite grasp it, I think, again, that middle ground is going to fall. And I think the successful companies of the future will be one of two companies. I think the smart companies are going to choose sides. The smart companies are going to either choose small, artisanal, low-tech, human, very much service-led on a personal level, or they're going to choose big, high-scale, or high-tech. Those are going to be the smart companies. But the smartest companies are going to be those that manage to combine the best of both worlds. They don't fall in the middle because they have the worst of both worlds, which happens for a few. It's going to be that combine the best of those worlds. So they have the convenience, perhaps, of high tech, of big scale, but they'll also have the humanness of high service. Companies like Enjoy. Enjoy is a company now that offers high tech retail. And what they do that's special is they will come in, and the people from the company itself will deliver your products by hand. And they won't just deliver them, they will sit down with you for up to 2 hours and talk you through how that's going to work, how that piece of technology is going to work for you as an individual. And they're happy to sit around and do that. And that's actually been a company created by a guy called Ron Johnson, who created the Apple Store. So a company like that, or some of, a lot of the other companies that are doing this thing. So it's high tech with high service. Those are the companies that are really going to thrive in the future.
As the next generation of employees enter the workforce, how must businesses adapt their workplace culture?
The generational thing's really interesting. Some people believe generations have different attitudes to each other and some people don't. I'm a big believer that actually there are generational differences. Yes, at the edges they're a little bit blurred, and yes, not everybody shares them, but on the whole, they do. And that's because typically what's happening to you when you're young, when you're coming of age, it's a really important time psychologically. And so if you have certain things happening to you when you're younger, it is likely to affect your attitudes, not just then, but in the near and in the far term. A lot of people have very similar attitudes to life, very similar attitudes to spending, to brands, to trust, privacy, those sort of issues. And a lot of that comes from what happened when they were young. So that is affected the younger generations, shall we say. Now, I think it's interesting from an employee point of view. I talk to so many businesses, whether that's out in consulting or whether that's at conferences, so many managers who say, oh, it's been so frustrating trying to deal with younger people. They expect everything. And I think there's been a little bit of that kind of knocking on. I think what happened was a lot of employers, a lot of managers got burned by the millennials. And no offense to lots of millennials, there's some lovely millennials out there, but you may indeed be one. But I think if you look at the way that the millennials grew up, they typically grew up, came of age at a time, a boom time, a little bit like the boomers, but this time of economic growth, this time where you could have everything. Parents were able to give them everything. It was a good economic time. It was also around the beginning of the millennium, was also the beginning of kind of the dot-com boom and the dot-com billionaires and overnight success and reality TV. So they grew up with a sense of everything's going to come to me. I don't have to work too hard. And that wasn't necessarily their fault. It was just a feeling in the air as they were growing up. And it's hard to shake that off. So I think that affected a lot of them when they went into the workforce. And they were like, well, why do I have to do these kind of menial jobs? Why do I have to do these things you're asking me to do? I should be a dot-com billionaire by now. And so, employers and managers are put off by this, understandably. But I think what's happened, and I think to some extent, they think perhaps this is how all younger people are going to be moving forward. But I don't think that's the case with the very youngest generations. I think Gen Z, and to an extent, the even younger, we're going to start calling them Generation Alpha, I think soon, the very young now coming up, have a very different mindset. They grew up at a very different time. The Gen Zs grew up and came of age around an economic downturn, around the time of 2009. They might have had parents early on saying, yes, you can have this, but then suddenly they heard a lot of no's, you can't, no, you can't have this. And so they've grown up knowing that. They've also grown up knowing that they're not going to have everything. They've seen kind of the fallout of the dot-com billionaires, the dot-com busts. They've seen the fallout of reality TV. So they know they're not going to get these expectations. They've also seen what the job markets for their future is looking like. And as a result, they become a much more sensible, much more self-sufficient, much more willing to work kind of generation. It's no coincidence they also are not drinking nearly as much as previous generations. It's part of a more serious mindset. It's a little bit of a kind of Safi from Ab Fab kind of thing. Your parents may be a little bit crazier. Maybe you were started to say, I've got to knuckle down and be more serious. So as a result, Generation Z, I think, are going to be much, they're going to be a real asset to the workforce, harder working, more self-sufficient, more willing to just crack on and do things, which is great. But there's an element whereby they know that they know their worth a little bit, and they have different expectations of previous generations, and it's not going to be all about the old ways of doing things. So businesses are going to have to adapt to this newest generation. And I think if you look at the sorts of things they're going to want, they're going to want more flexibility. They're going to want flexibility around when they work, where they work, to an extent, the sort of technology they're allowed to use, the sort of platforms they use. So companies need to be more flexible. But it'll be okay. If you give them that flexibility, they will work hard. I think also they need more autonomy. I think we need to see more teams-based, more results-based rewards and so on. And finally, a kind of greater sense of community and purpose within the workforce. This is a generation that feels passionately about things, again, broad generalization, but broadly true. They feel passionately about things and they like to work for something they feel means something, and they want to go into work and feel that means a little bit more. So I would say, yeah, make sure there's a real sense of community. In terms of what they need, they'll need a greater amount of flexibility. They'll want to be able to work a little bit more when they want, where they want. They'll want to be able to work with the sorts of technologies that work for them. So there needs to be a bit more flexibility, but that's no bad thing. That's also going to be a useful way for companies to work generally, a bit more flexibly. They'll also want more autonomy. So they'll want more teams-based work. They'll want to be more kind of results driven. So rewards should be based more around results and simply kind of turning up. And they'll also look for a greater sense of community, a greater sense of purpose. This is a very passionate generation, a generation that cares. And I think as a result, they're going to love working for companies that feel there's something, they're doing it together. That doesn't have to be politically correct, but it has to be a feeling that everybody's working together for a common purpose. And so, yeah, a greater sense of purpose, but a greater sense of community in the office. And it's not, this kind of blokey after work drinks culture that perhaps we've had as a way of communalizing people in the past in the workforce. It's much more of a kind of a more integrated family, a more inclusive family. And it's kind of, work hard, play soft. It's this gentle together feeling, let's work on this together. So I think if you can create that sort of atmosphere for these younger generation, you really will have some very, very hardworking and terrific employees.
You specialize in building a brand family. Why are customers becoming loyalty seekers?
I think in a time of crumbling institutional trust, a time of huge uncertainty and potentially greater rates of uncertainty moving forward, people are looking elsewhere for their support. They used to look kind of upwards towards institutions, towards governments, perhaps even retailers, the media. I think now they're increasingly looking sideways to people like me, as it were. So not people like them, but people like me, friends, family, neighbors, work colleagues, all of these kind of people who share my interests. And as a result, they're trusting horizontally. They're looking for places, communities, groups of people that they can feel part of, that they think can support them, and that therefore they can be more loyal to, and they're happy to be more loyal to. And I think if you look at this as a phenomenon for citizens, commuters, employees, the way for big businesses, for distrusted businesses to start to get loyalty back with consumers is to try and create what I call a brand family, is to try and make people feel that the company, the employees, the services, and the customers are all on a level. They're all part of the same big family. And it's not kind of top down and we will give you what we want. It's actually communication between all of the different groups within this family. So more customer feedback, listening to customers more, etc., asking customer advice, but also delivering on what customers are seeking. It's interesting. It's unusual that I perhaps would use TGI Friday as a good example of a company moving forward, and no disrespect to them. But actually, if you look at what TGI Friday does, it's really interesting. I was talking to somebody who actually worked in TGI Friday, and apparently the first thing they teach you as a waiter or waitress in TGI Friday is this. Actually, it's going to be difficult on a Zoom, but let's give it a try. Okay, so imagine you are a waiter or waitress in TGI Fridays. So you come along and there's a table in front of you here, and they're all sitting down, having a nice time. You, as a waiter, you could be standing up, as most waiters do, and go, hey, what can I do for you? But at TGI Friday, they teach you as a waiter to do something. They teach you to do this. They teach you to come down to the same level as everybody else, to come down on your haunches and say, what can I get you? So suddenly you're at their level. You are not this big company looking down. You're not something faceless. You're part of their gang. And everyone feels part of that. And that is what companies will need to do over the next 2, 5, even 10 years. bring people on board, make them feel that they want you to be part of their brand family.